In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about inconsistent interfaces, and then we're also going to talk just a little bit about the clonable interface. We're not going to go over any specific examples when we get to the clonable interface because there, again, are a lot of good examples in your book. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the details of what Cloneable is expecting in a way similar to what we did with the comparable interface, but there's a lot less to talk about. So starting with inconsistent interfaces. So an inconsistent interface is really about when we have two interfaces that we want to implement, right? Because remember, we can implement multiple interfaces in one go. So let's say we have interface A and we have interface B. Okay? And they're not going to do a whole lot. All right? They're just going to kind of exist. Now, I want you to remember that with the interfaces that you can actually, I know that I said that you don't get variables before, but you actually do get variables if they're set in a particular way. So in this way, we're just going to go, if we have an int, and we're going to call it answer, okay? And if we say that it's 42 in interface A and in interface B, we define that same value. We also make a variable called answer, and we just decide that it's a different value. Let's say that the answer should be 0 in this. And let's go ahead and change the color of this here to be gold. If I can do that easily. I cannot. This has been a little bit of a problem. Here we go. All right, so now that that's gold, easier to read a little bit from the other stuff. All right, so interface A defines answer to be 42. Interface B defines answer to be 0. And then we have, my class over here. And it's going to implement A and B, right? And then let's say I just have a nice little, we're going to have a void method. If I can even spell void, right? So print, this is just going to be print answer. Okay, we're not doing anything fancy in here. Doesn't take any parameters. And we're going to assume that it's public. I didn't put public in here, but we're just going to go ahead and assume that it's public. And I do system dot out dot print line, and I put an answer. What is going to happen here? All right, what answer is it going to put out? So is it going to put out 42? Right? Is it going to put out 42 here? Or is it going to put out the 0 from here? Well, what happens is really problematic because we don't know. We have no way of knowing exactly which one is going to print out, which one is going to get held by my class. This is what we call an inconsistency in our interfaces. This can happen with both variables and with methods. And it's really important to keep in mind that this can happen. So when you're defining your variables, when you're defining your methods, that they should be in some way unique to your class. They should be unique to your interface and what you're doing. If you're implementing a lot of interfaces into one class, this can become very problematic very quickly because you don't know exactly what variables are getting defined or you don't know what methods are being defined in all of them. So if you're experiencing an issue where this inconsistency is happening, This is probably the reason why, and there is a good example of this happening in your book on page 731. And you should take a look at that. It basically goes over the same thing I did here, but it's a nice little, has a little bit of additional information that you should be aware of. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the clonable interface. So, uh, the clonable interface. So, the clonable interface is a way for us to copy our objects without a copy constructor. So we don't need a copy constructor in this case. We just need a method called clone. And it will return a copy of our object. Now, what's important to know about the clonable interfaces should always return a deep copy. But that is technically semantics again. That's back to that concept of it's up to the programmer to determine this correctly. So make sure that when you're dealing with a clonable interface that you're doing deep copies, understand how this works, and also understand the difference between why we'd want a clonable interface, why we'd want to clone, and why we might want to copy. There's a lot of information, very good information in the book starting on page 733. All right, and it goes until page 736, just talking about that clonable interface. You'll also see something in there about the serializable interface, but we talked about that in the binary input-output section of video, so I'm not going to cover that. In the next video here, we're going to talk about inner classes and helper classes and what those look like in Java. And that will be our last video bit for today for this lecture group. Okay?